All right, thanks, Mark, I think. For those of you not following me on Twitter, Twitter handle up here, Evan and I are in a little competition to see how many Twitter followers we can get.
We have no competitions.
Yeah, there's no competitions. Healthy competition is good. So I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about those of you, community members, customers on 1.0 and getting ready to move to 2.0. So first of all, how many of you in the audience have already either downloaded and played with the OSS Alpha? These are the early adopters, folks. Follow them around. This is good. You'll learn things. And then how many of you have either signed up for or used our InfluxDB Cloud 2.0? A few more early adopters. Great. So for those of you who are doing that, thank you. We appreciate your feedback. But for those of you that are sort of waiting and figuring out what you're going to do next, I wanted to cover a few things that will help you move from the 1.x line to the 2.x line. And we're going to cover dealing with data. Where's your data coming from? How are you using it? How to get it into the platform. What we're going to do for dashboards and visualizations. Capacitor, another hot topic that we'll talk through. What else remains? And then the approach for how we're doing this behind the scenes. We'll give you a little inside Influx and what we're doing to get us there. So I think Evan touched on this at the beginning, and it's super important, but this is all about community. This doesn't work without community participation, community comments and feedback, and engagement. And so going from the alpha stage of the product, launching the cloud beta earlier this year, we really appreciate everybody's feedback and participation. This is super valuable to us in terms of building something, obviously, that's valuable to you. And sometimes we're a little nervous about that journey going from 1.0 to 2.0. And we want to make sure this path is as smooth and easy for all of you as possible. And so with that, what we would like to provide, of course, is a Limo Ride migration. And for those of you that follow us, we're very into Back to the Future, so we've found a Back to the Future limo to take you in. And part of that migration does not include champagne and jugglers and other entertainment, but there will be a limo ride to get you there. And so let's see if we can walk through what the steps and stages are. So first, I think Russ covered a lot about Telegraph already. This is our data collection tool, and I saw a lot of hands go up when he asked about how many of you were already using Telegraph. Now, somewhat quietly, we released the InfluxDB 2 output plugin at the end of 2018 and early 2019, earlier this year. And so we didn't make a big deal about it because there wasn't anything for you to write it to, the data. And so the point was we wanted to get that out there as early as possible because Telegraph tends to have a long tail. If you're deploying that across 100,000 servers, for example, it might take you a while to do updates. The earlier that you have access to the bits that will allow you to change configurations and write that data into a new edition, the better. Okay, so that's been seeded out there for a long time, and going back to Telegraph 1.9 has all those bits. We're currently on 1.12. And the Telegraph release cycle is typically on a quarterly basis. Teams working feverishly both on defect fixes as well as new feature additions. So those things are progressing rapidly. So that's there. And for those of you that may not be familiar, Telegraph also allows for what we call a dual write approach. So you can configure multiple output plugins in Telegraph to send data to multiple sources. And let's take a look at that briefly. So what you can do in the output configuration section of Telegraph is you can configure, obviously, the first one, InfluxDB 1.0, but you can also configure InfluxDB 2.0. Now, this makes it super handy for things like testing, getting ready to use new tools and technologies, right? As we release new versions, you can create this configuration, deploy it to a select number of agents. You certainly don't have to do it to them all, to start to feed data into systems. And by the way, you're doing this while not perturbing your existing production deployments. All right, so for those that weren't aware that you can totally do this, and this is available, again, going back to Telegraph 1.9. Now, how many of you are using one or more client libraries to basically either build applications or collect data from specific environments and feed that to your InfluxDB instance? Okay, good. So native language support, right? APIs that allow you to work with Influx. And we already have 5 client libraries available for you, if the animation works right. 5 client libraries are already up, posted, and available for you for InfluxDB 2.0. So C#, Go, Java, JavaScript and Node.js and Python is now up and running and available. Check the documentation for the specific GitHub links. That's also available for you. And so if you haven't found the docs, it's v2 docs. But all of those are listed and available now. We got some feedback this morning. Someone's using the, I think it's the Go library, and they're looking for a gzip compression option. So again, there may be some defects that we're working through as we continue to use these libraries. But the feedback's important. Land those issues, let us know what you're running into, and we'll help to make those things better. Okay, fancy animation. All right, so whenever you use the client library, you've probably embedded that in your application. So one of the challenges that you may run into is, well, I'm not really eager to rewrite or reintegrate the existing application. It's out there, it's running, it's sending data using the V1 library. What are my options to collect and maybe move that data across to InfluxDB 2.0? And so one of the things, of course, is this is all working great. And if you think about that dual write configuration that we just talked about, there's no reason why you can't put a Telegraph agent in between. So this sometimes called interstitial Telegraph deployments. So have the client library talk to Telegraph. There is a specific Influx listener that's available as an input plugin. And so you can configure that to appear to your client library like an InfluxDB v1 instance. And then again, using that dual write configuration that we just went through, you can send the data from that Telegraph agent both to the database as it currently works in v1, but you can also output the data to v2. Very clever and tricky way to get data flowing to both without rewriting your client apps. Make sense? All right. On the input side, in order to do this, simple configuration. Configure that InfluxDB listener. You can decide what port address you want it to expose on what host. You have settings for read and write timeouts and max body size and max line size of the line protocol. But again, very simple to combine that input configuration, that dual write output configuration, and start flowing data into your InfluxDB 2 instances. Again, you can use the open source, or you can try using the cloud instance. And again, there's a free tier, no credit card required, to try out all the features and capabilities that are there. All right, so what about existing data? So we've gone through some transitions over time, obviously from 0.9, 1.0. We've moved the cloud instance originally that was on DigitalOcean to AWS, and we run into this situation, and I'll just share from a support perspective. This ends up being sort of a 50-50 coin toss. 50% of you are keeping data at a very sort of tight retention policy. Very narrow, landing data on a regular basis, potentially high resolution data, but you're keeping it for a very short period of time. Let's say it's 30 days, 60 days, something like that. For those of you that are keeping your data longer, either months, years, or maybe infinitely, you're on one side of the coin, and those with the short retention policies are on another side. Those with short retention policies are like, I'll do the dual write process until I fill up the new instance with a sufficient amount of data that I'm happy, and then I'll turn off the old one. So this happens both in terms of server migrations and lots of other changes that may be happening within your environment. But for those of you with longer term data needs, wants, and requirements, we will produce bulk migration tooling. I think Paul touched on this a little bit, to allow you to convert those, that shard data that you've landed from 1.0 to the 2.0 format. Okay? And so this is one of the signals, again, moving from alpha to beta. When these tools are available, you'll be able to do that bulk migration. But in the meantime, you should be able to do that dual write mechanics to get data flowing in. Now, data access and dashboards is next. Heard about Flux. Those of you that participated in the training yesterday, thank you. Thank you for your feedback. And we heard a lot of great insights about how you'll be able to use Flux to take advantage of the data that you've already stored and perhaps the limitations that you've been running into previously. Flux is fundamentally the bridge from our 1.0 set of products to 2.0. And we have been continuing to offer updates to Flux as a technical preview in the 1.x line, again, both in open source and the enterprise edition. And our current plan is to offer a 1.8 version of InfluxDB that includes Flux once we reach that GA point that Paul mentioned. This should allow you to unlock more workloads on the data that you already have, and again, buy you additional time in terms of looking at and evaluating where we're going with the 2.0 platform. So look forward to that coming as we progress down the path. But of course, in doing so, you realize Flux is the primary query language in our 2.0 product. And one of the questions that we got both in the Flux training and I hear frequently from folks is, so what's happening to InfluxQL? I have all these dashboards, I build applications, I have Capacitor batch tick scripts that rely on InfluxQL as the primary language to access my data. I don't really want to change that if I don't have to. And so the answer is, of course, one of the motivations around building Flux and the new query language is we wanted it to be able to be transpiled. And what that means is we wanted to have a core engine and sophisticated enough semantics to allow us to accept other languages and on the fly convert them to something the Flux engine could execute. And I'm proud to say the engineering team has worked pretty hard on this, both with InfluxQL and also for those of you interested in the Prometheus community, also for PromQL. And we've had contributions from Julius Volz from that community to help us build a PromQL transpiler as well. And both of these are, have been worked on for the last, I would say, 6 months or so. And our intention is to provide support for InfluxQL on the 2.0 line so that you can continue to use your existing applications right on top of what we built. And when you want to take advantage of the additional power that's provided by Flux, you can dive into that, and it's available for you natively. So look forward for these two things to appear as well. And so what does that mean for your dashboards and visualizations? Starting with InfluxDB Cloud 2.0, we will enable an InfluxQL read endpoint, which will allow you to use your existing Grafana dashboards, your existing chronograph dashboards, all in a 1.x line. They should just work against a 2.0 backend. It should also allow your existing applications to do the same, and it includes Capacitor batch tasks as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about Capacitor next. The intention is to natively support InfluxQL so that you can continue to use that as your easy on-ramp to the entire platform. Now, Capacitor. One of the things that Paul also mentioned, Flux. In Flux, we have tasks, right? So one of the core motivations of moving to Flux was to try to unify the query system and the task system. Meaning in the 1.0 line, we had Capacitor, and you would write your tasks in TICKscript. And in InfluxQL, or InfluxDB, you had InfluxQL, which was your primary language. And these two couldn't be possibly different. And that obviously creates a learning curve and a challenge for many of you. So I'd like to see, how many Capacitor users do we have in the audience? Okay, so so it's really, you're on the wrong side of the room. If you're using Capacitor, apparently you should be sitting on the left. Okay, so everyone on the left side is a Capacitor user, everyone on the right. And that mirrors oh, you're on the right. On the right side of the room. Yes, so this mirrors the statistics, obviously, that Evan was commenting on earlier, which is we see a large adoption of InfluxDB, and then we see the power users, the really hardcore users of the platform, then dive into Capacitor as well. So with that in mind, what's the philosophy on Capacitor? As we move down this path, we know that there's a big change coming with InfluxDB 2. That's a big enough change and a lot of testing and a lot of sort of confidence building that you'll do on the new platform. And to ask you to do both that switch as well as a switch related to Capacitor all at the same time seemed like a bridge too far. That's too much. That's too much. So our intention is to offer a Capacitor 1.6 release, which will allow for subscriptions to be created against the 2.0 database, feed data into Capacitor as it does now, and allow you to continue to use, maintain, and leverage your tick scripts. It will also allow batch tasks coupled with the InfluxQL transpiler to continue to work in Capacitor 1.6. So effectively what this means is Capacitor will continue to be something that you can use and leverage even when you switch to InfluxDB 2, and then it's up to you to decide when and if you want to selectively migrate your tick scripts into Flux tasks. Right? So our focus in the near term will definitely be on the InfluxQL transpiler and enabling that community to move first, and then we'll follow up with figuring out the timing and availability to enable this capability on Capacitor itself. Okay, and so what else? What else is there that we need to do to help you move from 1.x line to 2.0. Security. One of the things that we did is the security model is completely overhauled in 2.0. There is no more anonymous access. By default, you have to start and enable with a username and password and get involved in tokens. This is something that was requested by the community and a number of our enterprise users as well. And so we've added that by default. The other thing is we unified the notion of database and retention policy. And that new notion is a bucket, for those of you who haven't looked at 2.0 yet. But a bucket defines both where you land the data and how long you're going to keep it. And so as part of the data migration, you're going to choose what buckets that you move things into. You can name them. The bucket names are a concatenation of the database name and retention policy. That sort of keeps it unified between the 1.0 and the 2.0 world. And that's the way the transpiler will expect the data to be there for your dashboards to continue to work and function. But looking at the other options in terms of security and how you'll provide and also gain access to the data is now completely different. And part of that difference is allowing you to have many, many, many more buckets than perhaps you might have had databases and old instances of InfluxDB. So there's a lot more flexibility there for you, including obviously the ability for you to join data. So previously, where you may have decided to pour a bunch of data into the same database and tons of measurements in the same database, those restrictions have been removed. And so you can start to look at saying, I want to isolate and keep individual customer data in separate buckets, but you'll still have the ability to join across those buckets and use the data as a whole. And that was totally not possible with the 1.x line. How many of you are using continuous queries? Okay, a few. So there is no continuous query functionality in 2.0, but you have Flux tasks. So it should be fairly straightforward for you to create a task, create the schedule that it runs on, and get that up and running. So that is a manual conversion. That is part of, that's why there's no champagne in the limo. There's the limo, no champagne, sorry. So continuous queries, there'll be a conversion process. And then the last thing, and I know Samir from Hulu is here and some others that rely on the native protocol support for things like UDP, Graphite, OpenTSDB, and others. Those were available natively on the database in the 1.x line. For 2.0, our recommendation is to feed that data through that interstitial Telegraph layer and feed that data so that it can be accepted in whatever native format and then converted into the format line protocol, which is accepted by the database itself. Okay? All right, so what's our approach to doing all this? This seems like a lot of work, as you might imagine. We started very early on the InfluxQL transpiler, obviously been working on PromQL. Bulk data is up next. But what we're doing from a tooling perspective is all of the tools, we're actually using the Cloud One infrastructure as a test bed to test, validate, and harden everything that we have built previously before we release it to the community. And why is because we believe this will provide us with sort of in the wild experiences for how people are creating queries, how they're feeding data in, and it essentially allows us to build and release a better and higher quality software when it comes out the door. So look for us to put that InfluxQL transpiler available in Cloud first. We'll obviously get feedback from all of you that are using it, and then you'll see it arrive as part of us transitioning from OSS Alpha to Beta, as Paul mentioned. But our goal is to have all of these tools and migration capabilities available for you as we close out the Alpha stage and move into OSS Beta. We're happy to take additional feedback from all of you as you're working through this and taking advantage of the new capabilities in InfluxDB 2.0. And our core focus during the beta period will be on performance, usability, and other user experience improvements. And again, we're happy to take your feedback on those things as well. So, community site, definitely engage there. For those of you that are more hardcore, GitHub obviously is available for you to open issues as well. And with that, Mark, we are done.
Okay, don't be shy because, Tim really needs some real hard capacitor questions, I would imagine. There we go. We have a microphone coming your way. I don't like to share mine, otherwise I'd do it. Only child syndrome.
So the hard question is, can you commit to any timeline or give us an idea?
Yeah, I think, did Evan pay you to ask that question?
Just hang on. Could you record that? Yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead again.
So let's repeat the question. Are we committing to any timelines? I can't share the exact timeline at the moment. I think one of the things is, again, if you follow me on Twitter, blog posts, that's where we're sort of announcing when we're ready to roll these things out. The team is really working in earnest, first and foremost on the InfluxQL transpiler. That's the first thing. We actually have it built, and we've been running it in the cloud environment for a while. Based on the advances that we've done in the Flux arena over the past, I think we're on release 0.49 at the moment of Flux, so you can imagine a lot of ground has been covered since then. We'll return focus to that and bring it up to speed, and that should be available in cloud relatively soon. My expectation is some of that will be available by the end of the year, and then we'll see how that trickles into the new year. But that's the core focus of the team at the moment. You can have features and time, but you can't have them both. I think that's a Paul Dix quote. So, other questions? Yeah.
So I have a question. Can I still use Python to write UDFs in the new version?
Yes, but you'll write them to Python user-defined functions.
Yeah.
For Capacitor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So none of the structure of Capacitor will change in 1.6. The only thing that we'll add is the ability for Capacitor to actually listen to the data being sent out of the 2.0 instance. And once the transpiler is available, so you got two types of tasks you're running in Capacitor. You have stream tasks and batch tasks. On the batch tasks, those will continue to use the InfluxQL transpiler. Should just work straight away. On the stream task, the data will be streamed off the database and sent to Capacitor in the same way that's done today. So if you've got other UDFs that you've written that are plugged into Capacitor, those should continue to function. Yep. That is also one of the things for Flux at the moment, extensibility of Flux. That's one of the core things, not necessarily in other languages at the moment, but the idea is to contribute functions across both Go, if you're contributing in that language, and then to compose additional functions in those user-defined packages that Paul mentioned, made up of the primitives that are already available in the language. And then I know if there's other things that are sort of larger bodies of algorithms that are out there, that's the next thing that we're looking at on Flux to see if there's a way to bring those in as well. Anyone else? Okay, well, you can find me in the hallway, Twitter, definitely, and thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Awesome.